I'm Mike, the co-founder of Haystack. Welcome to episode 6 of the Haystack Tech Uncovered podcast, where I'll be chatting with tech leaders, disruptors, academics and innovators about all things technology, software development and culture. Today I'll be speaking with Chris Grice. Chris is the engineering manager at PropTech Scaleup Street. Street Group is a multi-product platform that powers estate agents across the country. They've seen massive growth over the past year, so it was really interesting to get a behind-the-scenes look at what they're up to and their plans for the future of the business. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Yeah, so welcome to the podcast, Chris. So you're the engineering manager at PropTech Scaleup Street Group. Now, Street isn't necessarily a name that I guess a lot of everyday consumers know about, unless you're kind of in the real estate space. I think that's probably fair to say.
Yeah, that's fair.
But it looks like you guys are actually working on some really cool stuff behind the scenes. So I guess just to kick it off, and kind of for the purpose of everybody else that's listening, what does Street Group do, and what's your role?
So we build software for the estate agency businesses, essentially. So we build CRM and marketing software. The essential goal is that a lot of these businesses have been traditionally very underserved by technology. They have kind of lots of Windows 2000 servers with lots of GUI-based stuff on it that aren't really kind of keeping up with modern trends. And if you've moved house in the nearish past, I can imagine most people's experiences aren't that strong. And a lot of this is due to technology and due to the underserving of estate agents and a lot of the manual work they have to do. I think our kind of founder shared a stat when I joined, which was, I think it was about 6 calls on average to arrange one viewing.
Right.
So if you're trying to sell your house and having to do 50 odd viewings of something, the amount of manual work going into that is obviously huge. So we can provide technology that makes that better. We can also make that experience of moving house, of buying property, of selling property a lot nicer for consumers. So that's the rough gist. And having sold a house in March, it was very much close to my heart when I moved in.
Yeah, I think it's a universally painful experience, to be honest. So I'm
Yeah.
all for anybody that's in the kind of prop tech space. So before you moved to Street Group, what was your background before all of this? How did you actually get into tech, and what sort of led you down this route?
So I've had a fairly traditional route into tech, to be honest. Obviously quite involved in technology from an early age and play around with stuff. I think I had an old VTech with some basic compiler on it that I used to play around with when I was quite young, and then got technology. I actually wanted to get in design for a few years, realised I was really bad at it.
Right.
And decided quickly to move on. But yeah, I've bounced around a little bit. So I've been in kind of third sector organisations. I've worked in agency companies. I've worked in radio, in retail. So I've kind of bounced around sectors a little bit, but generally working on web technologies and trying to build products.
Did you come from a university background initially?
Yeah, so I kind of went into college, university, computer science background.
Yeah. How did you find that?
It was interesting. Back in 2008, the course was quite good, but I think a lot of the stuff I kind of that got my first job I did in my spare time, and kind of learned PHP, which got my first role. Some of the kind of CSS JavaScript stuff was much more in my spare time, actually building MySpace pages, which was kind of my first, I think, my first paid job ever was building a custom MySpace page, which dates me, I think, a little bit, but
that's old school. That
yeah, but yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, and then found a first job via kind of those skills I learned outside the course a little bit as well. So
I think that seems to be kind of the traditional story, or typical story, I should say. University background, but a lot of the stuff that you kind of build in your spare time, or the projects that you work on that you're actually genuinely passionate about, is what sort of fuels your career, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So I guess later down the road, obviously you've jumped. I think we were at Sainsburys before this. Is that right?
I was at Sainsburys for 4.5 years before Street.
So I think it's probably fair to say Sainsbury's Street Group seemed like two very, 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 very different organizations. So what was the jump from, I guess, this kind of enterprise, huge retail brand and company? What was the jump from this enterprise space into the sort of startup scale-up world like?
It was an interesting adjustment, and I think I'm still adjusting. There's still lots of behaviors that I exhibit that I go, actually, that's not what I need to do. I think the best example was I was trying to get some devices for a mobile team. I was like, right, let's write down a big document. Let's put like a procurement thing together. Until Tom, my founder, was like, just get these off eBay. I'm pretty sure. Oh, yeah, of course we can. Yeah, we can just do that. So yeah, I'm still adjusting a little bit. It's been very much interesting. I think Sainsburys was a very large organisation. It's like 300,000 employees, I think, at last count when I was there. But actually, the teams I worked in didn't feel like big enterprise teams. They were still quite small, they're quite focused. We kind of started in Manchester about 4.5 years ago. And those teams felt very, it didn't feel like a big, slow-moving organisation. We moved quite fast. We built stuff pretty quickly. So it wasn't an adjustment in that sense. It was more just the surrounding kind of enterprise steering a cruise ship feel sometimes, compared to the very, very quick-moving and very fast-changing culture at Street.
That's quite interesting to hear that Sainsbury's was nimble. Because I guess that's sort of the typical story that you hear is these big sort of behemoth enterprise companies don't necessarily move as fast as the small startup companies.
I think that's still very fair. I think there's definitely a speed difference, but I don't think it's as I think there's a view of some of these organizations as being very, very cumbersome, kind of taking like, years and years to get anything done. But it wasn't, in my experience. It did take a bit longer than it does at Street, but I think that's obviously a very different risk profile when you're working on the amount of orders that Sainsbury's do a day versus what we're doing at Street. So
what was what kind of challenges were there at Sainsbury's that were, I guess, different to the kind of challenges that you would see at Street? I would imagine a lot of it was to do with scalability.
Yeah, I'm about to say scale was probably the biggest difference. I think at Sainsbury's we did a lot of work for internal colleagues and customers as well. So we had kind of direct lines into them feedback wise. It's very different than working with consumer focused stuff or agent focused stuff where you don't always have that direct line in. We're quite lucky at Street. We do have a really good collaborative relationship with a few different agents, but you are still having to go out and kind of reach them when it's your colleagues. It's much easier to kind of just jump over and get a call or jump on Teams or whatever the communication tool is. So that's quite an interesting adjustment.
So you started out initially as a software engineer at Sainsbury's, then a few other places before that. How did you find the jump from being a software engineer into this kind of management role? And were there any, I guess, deciding factors that made you want to take the leap?
Because of a few reasons. I think people always talk about enjoying helping people, enjoying seeing people progress, sort of stuff. But I think there is an element of, especially in organisations, sometimes you need that progression to be able to have the impact you want to have. So as part of that progression is, to be completely blunt, was trying to, I want things to happen. I want to be able to impact that and be involved. So you kind of have to progress to be able to do that. Ideally, you wouldn't have to, but yeah, sometimes that is that jump. But I do honestly enjoy the people side of things. I really enjoy kind of working with people and looking at asking the right questions to move them towards a better place in their career. Sponsorship is a big part of what I do in trying to find opportunities for other people to show their skills off. I think I had kind of, the adjustment wise, someone very early on kind of told me not to treat it as a promotion, treat it as a brand new career that you got a junior in. And I took that to heart after a few mistakes. And I think I've very much tried to work that way and not try to feel like I'm an expert in management when I've been doing it for not that many years.
So I would imagine one of the biggest adjustments was be just kind of moving away from the nitty gritty, diving into the code base, more into the kind of people management side of things. I know personally, when I was a software engineer, it was always just kind of, how can I dive into this area of code and see if I can write the most efficient way possible? And then all of a sudden it's kind of more about nurturing people and relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of looking at how teams are working together, looking at how people are interacting and kind of trying to form the best teams. And you can't really write a test for people. It's kind of a much more longer feedback cycle of how things are working and making a change back in March and waiting for kind of until now to see the fruits of it. It's a very different kind of reward cycle.
Yeah. So I think before we dive a little bit more into the tech side of things, I'm quite keen to find out a little bit about life at Street Group.
Sure.
So why Street Group? first off, and what kind of makes this a great place to work?
So I think the biggest thing in terms of why I joined personally, the autonomy and the impact is huge. So I'm very much trusted to kind of get on with what we do and work what we think to work on. We've got the support, we've got the advice there, but people will generally kind of just trust that we get on with it and do things. That autonomy is fantastic. It's a really great product. When I was trying to join, I was really cross. I gave my notice in November and was selling a house in February and was really annoyed that I couldn't use the product I was about to come in and build.
Yeah.
But I couldn't make it go any faster because I hadn't started until March. So I really wanted to use the thing I was about to go start working on, which is a nice thing, actually. A lot of times you don't feel like a user of the thing you're building, but I definitely would be. I think technically some interesting challenges as well. Definitely scale issues in some places and some interesting things to solve.
Yep.
But yeah, technically it's not just kind of churning out CRM software. There's bits and pieces I'll have to look into that are much more interesting.
I think that's quite a refreshing take, actually. When you genuinely want to use a product as a developer, I think that's kind of half the battle, really. If you can sort of live and breathe the problems as from the consumer side of things, rather than just kind of get out of this mindset of cranking out lines of code. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have, that I've seen other organizations have from a development perspective, is kind of how do you remove developers almost from just being focused on the code base and actually start thinking about the customer's problems as well?
Yeah, I think it's a thing we're getting really good at actually now. It's kind of, as we've transitioned our teams to be more product focused and more product aligned, there's a lot more engagement from the devs to kind of go, yeah, we understand what these problems are. We'll chat to users, we'll chat to work out how stuff works. It's not just tell me what to work and I'll bash it out. Here's a big list of Jira tickets, I'll work through it.
Yeah.
It's diving into the problems, it's understanding the problems.
Yeah.
And it's actually engaging with why it needs to be done and how to do it best. Because ultimately the people who are working that close to it will know and come up with great ideas of how to do things better.
Yeah.
So yeah, we want that engagement, we want that level of appreciation and understanding of the problems.
So just out of interest, what does the actual process look like from a kind of feature idea, then distilling that feature idea all the way down to design and then finally reaching the dev team?
We kind of have a roadmap looking kind of now, next, later for a decent time in the future, not more than a year, I'd say. But we kind of distill that into, okay, well, what's the next for agents? We're working on a lot of letting stuff at the moment, which is a big part of what we need to do. The product owners in each team kind of then will work with design and engineering in the team to start doing a bit of a refinement process about what we think should be built, looking at wireframes, looking at design, looking at kind of those stories and getting a bit of here's what we need to do.
Yep.
The dev team will then take that and break it down into achievable, smaller slices of functionality. So we're trying to get a lot better at delivering smaller, faster, rather than big upfront, big bang releases, and try to get a slice of work out in front of agents quickly and get some feedback. So kind of that process all around taking those refined and kind of discovered features and turn them into like a proper backlog of work. And then I try to say we kind of work in an agile environment rather than we do agile. A lot of people kind of do capital A agile rather than the being agile side. But yeah, we tend to work in fairly vanilla Scrum, but without being dogmatic about it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm always a little bit skeptical about, you mentioned the roadmap and stuff, roadmaps that are any further into the future than 1 year. I think...
Even a year is a very long time. I think
that's it.
I've tend to work in that whole now, next, later idea where, the further towards the later it gets, the much less structured and much less clear it is, but that's fine. We try not to work too far ahead of ourselves. Otherwise, the speed at which we sometimes change tack is quite rapid. So it would be waste ultimately.
Yeah. So it looks like you guys have been going through a bit of a hiring surge in the dev team.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, what's that process been like, and what are the plans for the new devs? I guess without revealing too much.
Well, we've hired. So since I joined straight in March, I think I was employee number 50. I think we're at 80 something now.
Yep.
Not all devs, obviously, but the dev teams have grown quite significantly. So when I joined, there was kind of one large team or two parts of a large team. We're now up to 4 teams. So a lot of that growth has been finding repeatable patterns to kind of grow new teams and work out how to align and stuff. I think the next phase of that is going to be working out how we can continue to grow and work on stuff without losing the culture we have, which is really important, and also without completely stepping each other's toes and working out what independent streams of work we have.
So you mentioned a little bit about the engineering culture that you have at Street. I think the ability to sort of instill a healthy and productive engineering culture can basically make or break a dev team. In the past, so as part of the teams that you've either been part of or ran, how have you nurtured this positive culture, and how do you kind of what are the plans to sort of bring it forward into the future as well?
I think one of the biggest things about Street Group, particularly at the moment, is the transparency. So we kind of work on a default to open idea where if there's not a good reason to not share it, we make it public. It's public in the company. And generally, there's not many reasons to not share stuff. And that comes kind of top down. Like, I'm hearing stuff from all hands, and sometimes I'm sat there going, am I meant to know this? Is this allowed? And that's an adjustment period. But I think that culture kind of seeps through to the teams, and people are very open. People will share really, really easily and transparently. It's not a scary thing to share stuff. But I think how we kind of maintain that is definitely by just talking openly, being really at ease with sharing what we're thinking about, what we're worried about. There was an example in one of the teams of the week where kind of everyone was sharing, well, here's what's something I don't understand. Here's the stuff I don't feel confident with, don't feel strong at. Actually, a lot of teams, you wouldn't see that level of vulnerability where people are going, yeah, I don't understand X, Y, Z. Oh, yeah, I don't either. Should we put together and do some learning on that? That made me really, really happy with what we've built. On a wider basis, sorry to drone on this.
No worries.
It's a pet topic of mine, but I think I'm really influenced by the stuff that Google did in Project Aristotle. So I'm psychological safety and kind of how teams have become effective. And I think kind of underpinning that psychological safety and making it a space where you are free to express opinions, you are free to make mistakes is the most important thing and absolutely vital. I think we've definitely got that culture.
What did you say it was called? Project Aristotle? Project
Aristotle, yeah. So it's some work that Google did back in, I think, 2015, possibly earlier, looking at studies inside of Google, which teams were most effective and why. And it led into them doing some research that took in A.B. Emerson's work on psychological safety.
Right.
And they found that was the single most important signifier of which teams were more effective and why.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to look into that one. I've never heard of it before. When I kind of made the jump from, basically being a computer science graduate into junior software engineer territory, I think one of the scariest things for me was just those code reviews and always wanting to write perfect code. And it was kind of getting out of this mindset of, you need to know everything immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like sort of building this team around you and learning from people who've been there, done that, kind of got the t-shirt,
Yeah, and I think that's part of that safety thing where if you don't feel confident by putting a PR up that you're going to get absolutely torn apart in a really unpleasant way, you're not going to try new things. You're not going to, you're going to do things very safely and make sure you just go, right, this is within the lines. And you're going to lose innovation. You're going to lose new opportunities. So if you don't have that, you're going to stagnate.
Yeah, definitely. So I think success in the engineering team can be quite hard to pin down. It's not like sales where it's revenue driven. It's not like marketing where it's obviously lead driven. So what does a successful engineering team actually look like to you?
I'm going to have a first part of this being a quibble about terms. So we tried to not talk about engineering teams, which I think possibly moves the goalposts, but it answers your question possibly. So we try to talk about product teams. So we have the product owner, we have the designs, we have the engineering teams in there. And the biggest signifier of the output of that is whether customers are happy, whether the work's effective. I think Dan Noor talks about kind of the difference between productive teams and effective teams, where actually you don't want software teams to be productive particularly. Like building lots of stuff doesn't mean it's the right thing or if it's useful. Effective teams can maybe solve problems and deliver value with no code, which is fantastic. Much, much easier. And measuring that instead of measuring product output and customer outcomes is ultimately how I see people are successful. If that's going the right way, then however they're doing that, fantastic.
Yeah.
And then the flip side being obviously whether people are happy in their jobs and comfortable and their well-being, obviously. But
yeah, definitely. I think, again, another really interesting take on it. It's sort of like removing engineers away from the code base and thinking about it rationally, I guess. Ultimately, it's solving problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what we're paid to do, right? We're not paid to write code particularly. We're paid to solve problems or make value for the business. So
yeah,
measuring that is the best way.
So you actually just touched on it briefly there, but what does the product team look like then at Street?
So it would vary on team, but generally it's kind of 4 or 5 devs, product owner, designer, and then I think that's it for most of them. We've got a couple of different teams where we have smaller teams, which are more kind of, our mobile team, for example, is just 2 people with a product owner and designer actually now. We kind of gain that template as we build more teams. Generally, if we need like expert advice, or for example, our marketing team, we pull that in on an ad hoc basis rather than being like having a marketing person in the teams, for example.
Yeah. You guys have 3 products, I think. Is that right? All under kind of this Street group.
Yeah. So we've got 2 that are kind of we have Spectre, which is our prospecting marketing tool. We have Street, which is CRM, and we have just launched Insights, which is our kind of data reporting tool.
Yeah.
We did used to have Hello Again, which was around kind of when you sell your house a year later, kind of the same agent come back and going, "You still happy? Anything good?" That's now enrolled into Spectre as well as anniversaries.
Yeah, so I guess building one product is hard enough. So how did you guys identify these 3 product segments, and how have you structured the product teams around that?
So I tend to just focus on Street. So kind of my role just focus on the CRM side and Insights now as well. But it's hard to comment on how we kind of found Spectre because that was much before my time. I think it generally came from a need. So Tom had they kind of know the business quite well and the industry quite well. And I think Thomas originally built Spectre as a kind of a need he had, found out it was a really useful product and kind of built from there.
Yeah.
I think Street has been built much from a noticing a gap in the market, seeing a problem that we can solve and trying to put something in place that's going to solve that for people. Street is a much harder product to, because it runs the entire estate agency business or a lot of their business. It's a much higher barrier to entry to sell it. So you have to build a lot more of it first before you can get in the door. Whereas Spectre, I think you can add on top of your business existing. So you can kind of sell it as an add-on a little bit. So it's taken a bit more time to get Street up and running and kind of selling, but I think we're already seeing lots of agents use it and lots of people changing how they work from an agency point of view.
So one of the biggest benefits, as we've mentioned kind of earlier on in the conversation, one of the biggest benefits of being a startup or a scale-up is the speed at which you can move. So that rapid build, measure, learn cycle. I think this question is probably a bit selfish because it's something that I'm quite interested in as a startup founder. It's sort of how do you find that balance between building something quickly, getting it out there, validating that this idea actually has legs versus building things with scalability in mind, but not necessarily quickly enough to validate the need for scalability. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I don't know who came up with it, but there's a rubric that I use a lot of times, which is make it work, make it good, make it fast, where you kind of make something that's actually useful and then you make it refactored and beautiful and then you make it scale. We tend to follow that, I think, generally. Sometimes you know it's going to be a scaling issue. So, for example, we have a product called Bridge, which imports agent data over to Street.
Yep.
That works on lots and lots of data and needs to be fast. So there's a very clear scalability problem there. But generally, I think if you pre-invest in scalability, you're going to usually be wrong about where the scaling points are.
Yeah.
I think there's sometimes a false dichotomy talked about in terms of like doing things right and doing things quickly.
Yeah.
In terms of, building things fast and getting out the door versus looking at quality and looking at testing. And I think generally those two should go hand in hand. And that's how we try to work.
Yep.
I'm not saying we don't always lower that bar sometimes when there's a scaling need, but generally, if we can build things quickly, we can build things with quality and that will enable it.
I think a lot of the things that you identified, we kind of, as a startup, probably got wrong at the start. We built stuff with scale in mind when scale didn't come. And then we're now trying to build things quickly when we actually need scalability. So we've kind of got the timeline a little bit wrong at stages, I think.
It's the whole Yagni thing of you ain't going to need it, and kind of just challenging regularly, like when to goes, well, do you think, no, we're probably not going to need that.
Yeah.
And usually you're right.
Yeah. So obviously you guys are scaling really quickly from what I can tell. What's been the biggest tech challenges since you've joined? And I guess, have they cropped up as a byproduct of growth at all?
I think probably Bridge is the biggest technical challenge we've got at the moment, which is, like I said, about migrating data over there. We went a very API-driven route when we first did it, which was great. But as we get more and more users on the main platform and the agents we're kind of targeting in sales get bigger and more established, there's a lot more data to import, and it's a lot more load on the CRM to import them. So we're kind of transitioning away from more API-driven stuff to more queue-based things, which is quite fun. Yeah. Literally been doing that this morning, which is nice and enjoyable. But yeah, I think generally the technical problems are less scale of our agents and less scale of the data, more scale of how quickly we can get stuff out to people that is solid and tested and has good feedback. So kind of that change in delivery pace has been the single biggest change, I think, of the last sort of 9 months.
So I guess in the same light of that question, I don't know very much about the PropTech sector. Obviously, I know the big players. I kind of have a rough idea. What problems have you had to solve that's unique to that sector, I would say, and how have you used technology or specific technologies to bridge the gap there?
I think one thing we found is that the quality of data sometimes in the sector is not the best. We get lots and lots of, especially from older, more established agents, lots of very interesting, duplicated, non-normalized, unusable data. So one of the big things that was before my time a little bit, but was definitely an advantage we have is we have the ability to, when we're pulling that in as part of this import stuff, to look at areas, identify probably duplicates where we think the same people, same email, whatever, or lots of other rubrics we use to say, well, actually, this is the same person, same property. We have a great set of like market data we can use into the company that has lots of sources of data in terms of land reg data and pricing, and we can use that to our advantage a lot of times. So I think generally our data has driven a lot of what makes what we're doing successful. We can lean on a lot of that to kind of find the opportunities and do stuff. So.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. To be honest, I don't really know much about the kind of data that would be accessible in the real estate space. I know that a lot of companies like Zoopla, I would imagine, well, I actually listened to a podcast from the founder of Zoopla, and he was saying that was one of their biggest challenges as well. They kind of wanted to curate all of these crazy house prices and put it all together, and their biggest selling point when they released the product was kind of come and find out what your house is valued at.
Yeah.
And that was the big revolution over there. So yeah, it sounds like it's quite a lot of interesting challenges to take on board, though.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the challenge on the streets are definitely around how we can, the more kind of UX and how we solve problems, rather than being, it's not like a big gnarly, scaly algorithmic challenge all the time. I think a lot of times it's like, well, how can we make this different? How can we not just do like the default, here's the form, fill it in sort of approach? What can we do that is a bit more interesting, that makes things better, that saves time, that automates a role or automates a thing you have to do every day? So yeah, that's definitely it's a fun challenge.
Yeah. There's this kind of, I guess, innovate or die attitude that's heavily present in the tech space, especially amongst devs and product people. I mean, it's not always the case, but how do you stay on top of upcoming trends, and do you have any sort of go-to reading, watching, or listening recommendations? There's obviously a sea of things that you can read, and you can kind of be drowned in resources, I think. But I don't know if there's any go-tos that you have.
So I use a lot of Slacks. It's my kind of primary source of information, like in terms of Manchester community ones. I mean, a few different technology focused ones, like we use a lot of Laravel, so I sit in that quite a lot. I'm not a big podcast listener, but that's probably not my time because can't start off Yeah.
Make sure you tune into this one after.
I do listen to the Made Tech podcast quite a lot from Claire Sudbury, which has a lot of interesting guests on.
Oh yeah, we've just started working with Mid Tech actually.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, lots of interesting stuff from there. And I've got a lot better at reading recently, so I've been reading the Amy Emerson book. The work that Google do around the DORA stuff, so around DevOps, is quite influential each year.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the company itself, we do have quite a focus on innovation. So we do a weekly tech chapter where we kind of have a chance to chat about new things people have found, or new tools, like techniques, a new library, or whatever. And we'll tend to try those things out. That's been quite a good source of me learning stuff, actually. I came back to Laravel after many years of not doing it, and it's been quite nice having that there to go, what's this? Oh, that's this, okay. We're also having our first internal developer conference in a few weeks' time, which I think has been fondly termed StreetCon.
Right.
So that's going to be a day of just people talking about anything and everything tech, really. So looking at, I think someone's doing something around GraphQL, something around testing Laravel. A few people have not given me a title yet, but I'm sure there'll be more talks coming.
That probably leads quite nicely into my next question, actually. So obviously, I speak to quite a lot of people in the tech space, and I always tend to ask this question. Obviously, the tech industry is constantly evolving and shifting. New technologies, new innovations all the time. Is there any technologies that you're particularly excited about, and why? So
I'm quite a big advocate for GraphQL, actually. So I used to run a meet with Manchester that was around GraphQL. It's kind of died a death with lockdown and COVID, but not a chance to use it at Street yet, but we use it quite a lot at Sainsburys, and I'm quite bullish on it as being a really interesting way, both from how to build APIs and how to talk about products. It makes you really focus on your data relationships, makes you talk about things from a product point of view rather than just what's our data schema. I'm also quite interested in what Cloudflare are doing at the moment with like other edge technologies. I think it's a very interesting way of working, and kind of their morphing from a CDN into a new public cloud is a very interesting transition. They do some really cool stuff. And then Jamstack stuff, so around like what Netlify and Versal are doing with kind of static compiled websites is really cool. There's lots of growth there and lots of nice things to play around with.
What was the Cloudflare one? Sorry, I'll have to check that out. I've never...
so they're doing a lot of stuff with like cloud edge workers, like putting functions on like CDN edges, so you can basically write your code as close to users as possible. I think they've just created like an S3 competitor as well. They're doing lots of things that I wouldn't have expected them to do sort of five years ago, which are really interesting.
Yeah, cool. So I guess on the flip side of things, is there any technologies that you're nervous about or skeptical about?
I think skeptical. I'm not sure if this is the best thing to say publicly, but NFTs and crypto generally, I get a bit skeptical about.
Right, controversial.
Yeah, I don't know. I think blockchain and like ledger technology I think are really interesting, but I think generally the proof of work, I think generally environmentally makes me very nervous.
Yeah.
When you see usage, I know there's green coins and stuff like this, but it's not an area that I know that much about, so I'll kind of defer to people who do, but it does make me nervous. I think generally stuff like, not the metaverse in particular, but walled gardens, I think, make me nervous. I think I'm a big believer in the internet being successful because it's an open platform, and the fact that anyone can kind of build a new product, new tool, new website, and kind of stick it up there, and kind of this move towards more controlled spaces by big tech orgs is long-term detrimental, I think.
Yeah, I think the metaverse to me just sounds like some kind of dystopian nightmare.
Yeah, it doesn't fill you with confidence when you see some of the videos when you think of the advertising potentials. But
yeah, I completely agree. I'm not a huge fan of it, I think. So just to kind of wrap things up, I guess, do you have any advice for anyone looking to move into an engineering management role or in the process of building out an engineering team like you guys are?
I think the advice for anyone moving into a leadership role like this is similar to what I said before about treating it like a brand new role, treating it like you don't know anything, because you most likely don't in terms of the leadership management side. I definitely didn't. And I think treating it in the same way you would when you're a junior dev and learning in the same way, looking for opportunities, looking for new things to pick up and techniques and tools and mentors, all that sort of stuff, I think is the right way to approach it. If you approach it with I'm now at the next stage and I know as much as I do about this as I did about engineering kind of 2 weeks ago, then you're probably going to set up for failure.
For anybody who's kind of looking to make that jump into the first software engineering role, do you have any advice for those folk?
First engineering role completely?
Yep. So it could be out of uni or self-taught.
See, I sometimes struggle to give this advice because I think it's been a while since I did it and I took a really traditional route. So for me, it's easy to go, go to university and do a course, then there'll be jobs, which isn't really maybe as realistic as it could be. I think we've just hired 3 junior devs, so I can talk from that point of view and kind of what we looked for there and what really people stand out is that ability and aptitude to learn and the kind of the desire to get stuck in anything, everything and try things out and be responsible for your own learning to an extent and find things that excited you and want to grasp things. I think if I was looking for someone kind of brand new, that's what I'd look for. So if that's useful advice for people who are in that position, I think that's the best I can give. I don't really want the people that sits and goes, just have your CV out to lots of people. There's loads of jobs going because, I realise it's hard to break into the industry these days. There's lots more people trying to do it and there's lots of roles, but lots of people don't want brand new juniors and don't want to take the time to train them up or invest, which is a shame. Yeah,
I think once you get into that role as well, there's such a degree of kind of imposter syndrome that kicks
absolutely.
In. I think that was one of the biggest challenges for me. Like I say, was just almost this acceptance that actually you are a junior.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So I think just to wrap things up, do you have any news that you'd like to share?
The only big thing at the moment is our Insights launch, like I mentioned. So that went live, and that was our launch on December 3rd, I think it's going to be. So that should be quite interesting. That's our first kind of real public launch of so it uses our data so strongly. So it's kind of a real chance for agents to play around with some of the data we have on market information and lots of cool stuff. So excited to see how that goes and how much it gets used. And then, I think other news, we'll be hiring lots in the new year, I hope. If you're interested in PropTech or building interesting things around this space, definitely look it up.
Good stuff. And where's the best place to connect with you online?
Personally, I'm on Twitter at Chris Grice. Feel free to go me on LinkedIn. I generally don't check it as much, but I'll be there.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much, Chris. Really interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in to episode 7 of the Haystack Tech Uncovered podcast.